beautiful cat Belle today with us. And who is she? She is one of the first women who started playing rugby in Canada. And she's probably to blame for rugby with women the way it is existing today, because once you hear her story and the way she pushed women's rugby through, I think is very fascinating, but I'll let her tell her story firsthand and I'm not going to interrupt.
Oh, thanks, Val. So, that's a very generous statement first. I don't know for sure about Canada, but certainly in BC. So I began playing boys rugby with a team when I was in grade 9, so like 1991, 92. And there was really only women's university rugby at that time, and I don't think that it was particularly well known. So I had an opportunity, just simply because my coaches were generous, to play with boys as opposed to just practice or just hang out or just learn the skills. But part of that was because I actually got kicked off the girls' soccer team in grade 9 because a girl ran into my shoulder and then claimed that I body checked her. So I got told that I was being too violent and too strong and too aggressive to play soccer. And so I decided that a sport where I could actually genuinely hit people was probably better for me. And so that progressed all the way through until high school level, and just slowly and slowly gained more traction over those 5 years. So where I played grade 8 and 9 rugby, and then through those 4 years following, subsequently in 1996, we actually went to the provincial competition for boys AAA rugby. We'd won our local championship, and that was about the time where things were really picking up for women's rugby. It was starting to become much more well known. There were more and more and more teams every year, but still quite a battle. So I actually got told by the head of the BC Rugby Association at that time that if I even came and dressed on the field as an extra, that my team would be disqualified, simply because it was a provincial championship for boys only, despite the fact that my coaches and my team had obviously given me quite a lot of support up until that time. And so I didn't go, just simply out of respect for how much work the boys had put in. But that wound up getting some press and some publicity and a few interviews, especially with things like the Vancouver Sun and the sports page and stuff like that. But what ended up coming out of that was this explosion of women's rugby, not only just at the university level, but club side level and kind of everywhere across BC. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm so much the first. There were women doing this before me, I think, but there was certainly a big explosion in and around the time where I was getting some press about being denied my rights to play with boys, for sure.
Right. And knowing Canadian women, and I guess you also took it for all the women in rugby and kind of stood up and spoke up. And that was quite a bit of courage. Don't you agree?
Yeah, and what's really interesting, and I'm sure that this is something that we can touch on too, is the fact that I know in those interviews that I said all the right things. I said things like, I'm very grateful to my first coaches. They could have said no. I'm very grateful to the fact that I had this opportunity and I took it as far as I did, blah, blah, blah. And that was never published. Those comments were just struck from the interview. Really, all they wanted to hear and all they wanted to know was about how unfair it was to me and how women were being unfairly punished by, not having these opportunities, etc. And so some of those interviews I'm actually not very proud of. The things that they published were specifically cherry picked to actually make it look worse than it was. And so I know for me anyway, it was quite a battle, quite a challenging arena to just exist in, right? So just being a woman existing in a male-dominated environment was incredibly hard. And I think we underestimate just how much of a long-term impact that has on especially when your body is what's valued. Like as an athlete, you're only as good as your body is, right?
Right. Yeah.
So at some point or another, you start getting hurt. At some point or another, it starts getting hard. And then you're no longer as valuable as you once were. And
Yes.
at that time, it was actually, you could make money playing rugby in Europe, but not necessarily in Canada. In Canada, it was still really undervalued and kind of still is. But at at that time, there was no sevens. Sevens didn't exist. There was really only club side teams, and you had to be a group of 25 to 30 girls, and you all had to travel together and get along with each other, which is pretty hard. And so in Canada, because we're so geographically spread out, it was just, you were collecting girls from all over the country potentially.
Yeah.
And then you wouldn't necessarily have anything more than a few months to practice together before you were off playing internationally. And that again just was far more complex than working for a smaller geographical area. That unfortunately is the year that I got really injured. And so that never actually came to be. So I didn't travel, I didn't go anywhere. I was still in university, and then having to cope with not only losing kind of my career path, losing all of that, but then also losing all these sports opportunities on top of it as well. So yeah, it's a very complicated time in my life there, which tied a whole bunch of things together. So a lot of it, again, just I don't necessarily remember very well either, because it was fairly traumatic, actually.
Right.
So having a lot of anxiety over it, having a lot of late nights where you're up thinking, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life next. Like, no idea. And so the mental health aspect of that is actually quite strong, aside from the physical health part of that as well.
Of course.
So, mhm.
And what was your thinking process, in the sense of, did you look for help? Did you look for an advisor? Did you look for some support? Because at some point I find that it's a little bit sensitive, because here you are, a superstar at one time, and then you're completely lost and broken at another, and that hits hard.
I would say I don't think so. I was probably incredibly arrogant at that time, at that age, to think that I could handle all of this on my own, for sure. I don't think anyone looking at my life would go, oh, you'd made some really poor choices there. But I certainly recognize the urgency. It was suddenly, I need to get a job and I need to make money somehow, and I need to reevaluate how does sport fit in my life. And I had this idea of myself as a strong athletic woman, and that was not true. At that moment, I was really injured and kind of at the mercy of my physiotherapist and a lot of other just even my job demands. So I'd gone into kinesiology because I wanted to play rugby and have something fun that I could do for school. And then kinesiology had to ultimately end up being my job. And so that's, again, a fairly strongly physical component to like just doing the work. So not only was I rehabilitating myself, but I was working in a physical environment, and then also having a bunch of treatment on top of it. All based around my physical capabilities and not necessarily around your mental health, for sure.
So would you say that your physical injury injured you psychologically, that drove you back into sports, but finding out why it happened, how you can prevent it for other people, and kind of taking your physiological and psychological trauma and apply it for the better good of somebody who might be, in your situation, maybe, support them in that way?
How about yes, now? I don't think that I was capable in that moment or in that time of doing that, but I certainly recognized that I'd had an amazing team of people around me as an athlete. So I'd had people who were looking out for my body, and I'd had people who were giving me diet advice, and I had people who were trying to, ensure that you were psychologically prepared for your game and all kinds of stuff. It was amazing. Certainly all the aftercare treatment, right? Your physio and your massage and your chiropractor and your anybody that you wanted, you could have come treat you. But I also realized just how athletes disregard a lot of that information while they're being athletic. So I distinctly remember a woman taping my ankle and saying to me, "You cannot run on this, the tape won't hold." And me convincing myself that jogging was not really running, it was fine. And then of course, coming back the next day with your ankle just the size of a grapefruit. She goes, "What did you do? What have you done?" It's fine, right? It's fine. In those moments, we don't listen. But kinesiology is based around the rehabilitation of injury. And I slowly have kind of gleaned that information for myself and applied it for myself, but I sure didn't at the time.
For sure. I can sense how much you are with your heart and soul involved into what you do, which is so inspiring.
Oh, thanks.
And I definitely know that when you are going through the turmoil of transitioning from sports into a new career, there's rarely that hard, there's more analytical work that's involved. When did it happen for you that you actually put your heart into it?
Oh, I've always been very lucky, Val. I don't think there was a single moment really where I didn't want to do this work. Once I accepted that I wasn't going to have the career and the choice. Very, very, very often, I think people get stuck doing something that they don't love. And I've been so ruthless about only choosing work that I find fulfilling and only pursuing paths that I thought were going to be valuable to me. And that's not to say that it was easy at all. There's no shortage of other bosses who would tell you that I'm kind of a terrible employee because I won't do things unless I actually want to. Hard to manage. And certainly being self-employed has allowed me that freedom. Incredibly risky maneuver on my part, but that was about now 10 or 11 years ago. And so I've managed to create a career for myself and create employment for myself, partly by being passionate about it, partly by trying, right? Yeah. And so it's if you're ambitious in one area of your life, I think it's really hard to tone that down and then not be ambitious somewhere else.
Of course. What struck me right now in the way you phrased it is that you accepted that you're no longer pursuing the sport in the sense that you envisioned it before, and the way it used to be in your life. And I think that acceptance for the longest time, or should I say the no acceptance of it, is holding people back from
100%.
Yeah, and they're trying to get back, and they're trying to find ways, and they're going against the current. And I am not the person who just accepts the flow and just kind of floats there thinking that I'm going to get anywhere by just flowing somewhere. I accept the state of flow where everything is easy, but just floating there, not my idea. And so I find that a lot of people, especially with athletic background, they tend to fight the circumstance instead of gaining the most out of it and kind of shaping it the way it is, understanding it, accepting it, and moving on. Because
there was a very large chunk of my early life where I was angry, deeply angry about what had happened to me. And I think that's honestly where the athletic mindset sets you at a bit of a disadvantage, actually, because you are valued externally. You are given kind of this glorified position. And then when that no longer exists for you. You go out into the world and then you wonder why your boss doesn't recognize you instantly as this spectacular human being, and how dare you tell me that I have to do better or work harder or I'm not perfect or this isn't great or whatever. So yeah, I did spend a long time actually being very angry at the world, angry at my situation, angry at this sense of abandonment or this sense of unfairness. How come nobody told me it was going to be like this?
Yeah.
But I think that's also a sign of maturity too, is when you can start to say, it is this way. It isn't going to be different for me. Other people have had this experience too. And now what am I going to do? What decisions am I going to take on that will make that easier for me to bear? Because that's really all we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Is I don't love working, to be honest. I don't think that anybody does. Would I rather be paid to play my sport forever? For sure. Is my body going to tolerate that? No. Am I the same person that I was 10 years ago? Absolutely not. Right. So you have to evolve, you have to change. And I like your thought too, which is acceptance of it as the way it is.
Yeah.
That's a really, really hard thing to come to when you're used to being in charge of your own circumstance.
Exactly.
You're in charge. I can change this. I can work harder. I can train more. I can be better. And then suddenly you can't.
Yeah, you're definitely in charge of the process as well, and the process is probably more enjoyable, since unless the sport is not enjoyable, you
Right.
can't really
That's possible
persevere.
too.
Exactly.
Maybe there are some people who hate their sport. Maybe there are, but
Well, I've met a few, but what starts to happen is that they get very injured, and then it's kind of, again, partially self-sabotage, where they no longer want it, but they're pushing themselves, and their body is like, okay, dude, you got to step back or I'll hold you back, and then injuries happen. So in your work line right now, do you work with former athletes? Do you encounter them anywhere? Do you still feel that kind of connection, athlete to athlete?
well, that's an interesting question, simply because I have 2 points to that one. No, I don't. And I actually deliberately avoid working with athletes at the moment, partly because they're all a little crazy and they don't listen. So when you're doing rehabilitation work and you want someone to listen to you, it's much easier to work with the general population. Or as I said, my work right now is primarily with cancer patients. And so there is a sense of gratitude there, just simply from simple actions, right? Being able to allow someone to walk again, so much gratitude associated with that. It keeps me really connected to my work. Whereas athletes typically have these really high expectations for whatever their recovery looks like, and are generally disappointed because they can't do it or whatever. The other thing that I would point out too is that rugby is exceptionally weird in that you can play as long as you want to. There are no shortage of non-contact games, teams, this idea that you can still be involved in that community to whatever degree it is. You can go out and play a game of touch rugby on a Saturday with your local club and it's fine. I remember literally being at our old boys club was rated by the color of your shorts. And so if you had orange shorts on, no one was really allowed to touch you or tackle you. It meant you were kind of off limits. So there are people still playing this game well into their 60s and 70s and longer if they want to. So that's really special in my sport, I think. I don't think that there are a lot of other club side teams where you get to participate and not be highly, highly competitive. I mean, think about that in gymnastics. You're not doing casual gymnastics, not really.
Right.
You're either in it or you're not, right?
For sure.
So I find that's my connection more than anything else, is this idea that it can always be accessible. I can always go do that if I choose to.
Right.
And it doesn't have that permanence, that dislocation for me.
Mm-hmm. Being a team player in a sport, and now being the business owner where, correct me if I'm wrong, you run it on your own.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So did you ever miss that portion of being a team player, and how did you decide that you're actually functioning better on your own in the business sense?
So that again, that's a bit of a transition too. Yes, you miss the camaraderie and you miss the ability to draw on other people's experience. I think even being an employee, one of the things that was super important to me was a overarching kind of team environment. Lots of places say they have that. Lots of things claim that they're like, "Ooh, we're part of a team," but like sometimes not really. And culture plays a huge part of that too. Like if you're gonna go work somewhere, you want people to be at least kind of on the same page as you in terms of their motivation and in terms of their ambition, in terms of their business sense or whatever. And I really struggled with that. I really struggled with watching people who were kind of my bosses um not be interested in developing their team, or not being interested in sharing their information, or not being interested in giving new people opportunity. Like I didn't like that very much. And so at some point or another, I did run my own company. I am running my own company now, but I've managed to attach myself to some people who, even though they're also entrepreneurs and also running their own businesses, we do have a lot of cohesion. So it's nice to be able to go into work and see people who you get along with, you can kind of share information with and be part of a team with, even though we're not necessarily working together. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Totally. I think you still were able to find the like-minded people, even though you are crafting your own art, still being part of the same mini world, so to
Yes,
say.
it can absolutely be done. It's just really difficult, and you have to know your own compass pretty well. You have to
For
know
sure.
what you're aiming for. So if you're lost, I spent a lot of time being a little lost and getting sucked into other people's agendas. Like, that's great. It's a job, but it's not fulfilling.
Yeah.
And then if you have this draw, this thing that you want to do, or the way that you want to behave, you eventually can craft that for yourself.
Right. So would you say it took you about a decade to really find your Northern Star?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
10 years for sure. And I would say a little bit of that is anything. Well, I was young when I graduated from my undergrad. So I was only 21 and I was already working. And I already had this huge like athletic career under my belt at that point too. So I think a little bit of it is until you've been working for 10 plus years, people don't really trust you to be an expert yet. Not really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then once you have tried a bunch of things, you can get a little bit more clear about what you want and what you will tolerate.
For sure.
And then it just becomes how much fear do you have about that, right?
Yeah.
I had a lot of fear about going out on my own, but I wasn't unsupported. I certainly had lots of people who said this was a great idea and I'll do whatever I can to make it happen and just change my trajectory that way.
Yeah.
So not staying in a job is also a choice.
I've done a lot of interviews. A lot of the times I see that people are taking only the best, that they're able to share, and kind of blur what happened in between, because it's not very pleasant to think about it. And when you think that it's not pleasant, for me, that means that there's still energy left in there that needs to be released and finally kind of resolved, and I can see how you kind of went through the entire spectrum of self-doubt, anger, to self-acceptance, acceptance of whatever is happening with you, taking that and building that as a base for your big jump.
Oh, thanks. I do appreciate that, because I do think even in my experience talking to people about business or talking to people about sports, I do think they lie. I think they do kind of gloss over the messy bits. It was I wouldn't give up any of it. I would not give up any of the hardship or any of the struggle or any of the abandonment or any of the sadness, because it actually allows me to be better at my job now. And
For sure.
that is something that I think people wish away. Oh, I wish that hadn't happened to me, or I wish it was different. That doesn't actually help you grow.
For
Just in
sure.
terms of, again, acceptance. Oh, I appreciate that so much. I would say I'm still fighting sometimes, for sure. But a little bit of it is I'm happy, right? I'm happy with where I've landed, and that makes it easier to accept the kind of not so great parts of it.
You're 100% correct that we grow from the nasty part. We don't grow from the nice and pleasant stuff. We get shaped by the stuff that we overcome and that we went through.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice if we could grow from all the happiness? Like, yeah, I'm just happy all the time. It's amazing. No, I fully accept that there are people having a very different experience from me. I fully accept that being different and starting things out is sometimes equally as rewarding as seeing the fruition and seeing the greatness of it.
Yeah.
That, again, we all have to come to that in our time, right? And I'm old now, Val, so it's happened. Like, I'm here.
Well, it biological age is relative for sure. The maturity doesn't come with age. That's that's a topic for another conversation. But I've seen a lot of much older people who are still believing in unicorns and rainbows, that they're going to show up in their life.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Kat.
Anytime, Val. I know that we can talk whenever you want.
Yes.